or afternoon now, rather. Still getting adjusted to the daylight savings change, I reckon. John TheMorgile here, checking in for some static plain truth for you this lovely Saturday afternoon. March 23rd, 2024, in beautiful Greenville, South Kakalaka. I hope y'all are having a wonderful and blessed, productive day. And if you don't mind, go ahead and give me a thumbs up there if you can see and hear me. That way I know I'm not sitting in this room talking to myself. I would appreciate it. So yeah, got a good show for y'all today. Gonna talk about a few current events in the Narnia world that is space and related topics that have piqued my interest. And continuing with the sort of tradition that I started on the last stream, I'm just going to talk about, before I get into the news items, the articles that I wanted to go over, just a single sort of genre of evidence that lends itself very nicely and logically to a static plane Earth and does not do so for the concept of spinning ball Earth. And today I wanted to talk about basically centrifugal force, or if I say centrifugal force, it's the same thing, potato, or like inertia as well. So I feel like these sorts of proofs, these sorts of items, this sort of objective reality is probably a more potent form of evidence against the spinning ball Earth rather than just the physical lack of curvature, because the physical lack of curvature is pretty darn important in the case for flat Earth. I mean, obviously, but the thing is with the infinite space trope, that pre-requires the Earth, our world here, to be spinning around, orbiting, flying through space in several, like 5 directions at once, along, multiple curvilinear orbital trajectories, right? And, physical reality demands that, with certain actions, there are going to be reactions, right? Unless, of course, you're talking about spinning ball Earth, right? Because when you're talking about spinning ball Earth, it gets just all kinds of freebies, all kinds of passes when it comes to objectively considering reality, right? So anywhere else in reality, if an object is spinning and going around circuits, whilst going around larger circuits at different angles to the original 2 spins and circuits, there's necessarily going to be measurable physical elements to that, right? And the thing is, unfortunately for the globetards, the world here is a fixed frame of reference. Without question. It is not debated. It is not debatable. The world is a fixed frame of reference, okay? And the globetards, basically what they say is, it is a fixed frame of reference because there is no acceleration. Yeah, the Earth's spinning and it's traveling at thousands of miles an hour, and we'll get into the exact numbers that they claim in a minute, and even millions of miles an hour with the alleged galactic frame of reference. But because there's no acceleration, then we don't feel it. We don't measure it. It is not measurable. It's not detectable in any way. Because there is this pesky little fact, again, I'll reiterate, that the world is a fixed frame of reference. Okay. And so what that means in a nutshell is the world behaves as if it is a stationary object. Okay, that's how it behaves. So it exhibits the, and by the way, shout out to Stinky Cash. I saw Stinky Cash in the chat earlier. I hope he's still here because it's been a while. I haven't seen much of your work lately, and I've been subscribed a few times and it keeps unsubscribing me. And then if nothing comes up in your feed, you forget about it, right? So anyway, shout out to Stinky Cash. I meant to say that closer to the beginning. But anyways, lost my train of thought there. But so, you know, what they claim, we'll just go with the numbers that they claim. This is spinning ball Earth logic, not my claims. This is the standard scientific belief. So if you believe in science with everybody else, with the 90% of the globetards of the world, then you must believe that the Earth is spinning around at just over 1,000 miles an hour, standing at the equator. Okay, that's because, you know, they claim that the radial axis of the Earth at the you know, at the pole in the middle or whatever, the axis, the radial axis is just shy of 4,000 miles, they claim. And because it takes 24 hours for a single day to elapse, then standing at the equator, that means you're traveling at 1,037.5 miles an hour. Okay. And so they reason that the reason that we don't notice that is because it is a fixed rate. There is no variance in it. There is no acceleration. And all we are going to be able to notice or measure would be acceleration, right? Because the first thing they're going to tell you is, well, if you're driving down the highway in a car, and hold on, I'll be right back. If you're driving down the highway in a car, you can flip a coin, right? And it's not going to go flying towards the rear of the car, right? And so, you know, therefore, that's why we don't notice the 1,000-mile-an-hour plus rate of spin at the equator. By the way, if you're standing like anywhere in the United States, it's not 1,000 miles an hour, they claim. It's still faster than the speed of sound, just depends on your latitude. So, you know, Florida would be a little bit slower. New York would be slower still. Northern Canada would be even slower. You know, I wonder if I'm still streaming. Can you not stand right there? I think it's messing up the stream. I don't know. Throw me a comment though if y'all can still hear me, because I've lost the feed on my end, on my Firefox, on my computer here that I'm monitoring. So just throw me a comment. Okay, good. So good. So they claim, you know, if you're driving down the highway in a car at a constant speed, it doesn't feel like you're actually moving. And that is their response to this. So of course we don't notice the 1,000-mile-an-hour rotation of the Earth. Now, so here's the thing. Okay. So what they're saying is basically it's your frame of reference. Okay. If you're in the car going 60 miles an hour down the highway without hitting any bumps, it feels like you're standing still and you'd never noted that you were moving. So it is a fixed frame of reference. But the thing is, there's a nuance and a caveat to that. And the caveat is, as long as you are firmly attached to the primary body. So in the car going down the highway analogy, the car would be the primary body and the frame of reference is within that car. And you would be like a secondary body once you deviate from that frame of reference. So as long as you're sitting in the chair of the car, right, you're not gonna experience any acceleration. But if you were to say jump out the window, right, or like we'll take this analogy over to the train. Okay, so instead of a car, we're talking about a train going, say, 50 miles an hour straight down a track without hitting any bumps. And I've done this. If you jog towards the rear of the train as it's moving, it's actually quite a bit easier, and it feels like the train's doing half of the work for you. Whereas if you jog towards the front of the moving train as it's doing the same 50, it's actually a little bit more work. It's a little more difficult to run towards the front of the moving train because you're racing against the train. And, because jumping out of the car window is not exactly a good analogy because you're also dealing with the pressure of the atmosphere. It would be like wind when you put your arm out the window. You've got that pressure of the atmosphere. So it's not a really good analogy, but another analogy would be, so if you're sitting in the back of a pickup truck, right, and you hawk a loogie straight up as you're going 50 down the road, that loogie is going to appear to go like hundreds of feet, right? Because it's going in the opposite direction as the truck that you're in. And also the back pressure of the atmosphere is on a different frame of reference, okay? But so there's that. Okay, so the statement, we only notice acceleration based on our frame of reference, needs the caveat statement so long as you're firmly attached to that frame of reference. And also, when you're dealing with straight line paths or rectilinear paths. On the other hand, and by the way, the overall genre of this stuff we're talking about is inertia. It's basic physics. On the other hand, you also have the concept of rotational motion, okay? Curvilinear motion. And with curvilinear motion, so like if you're driving in a car, not straight down the highway, but say turning left at a high rate of speed, your inertia sort of wants to keep you going in a straight line path. And so you're going to notice if the car is turning left at a high rate of speed, your body sort of goes to the right relative to the car. Now, of course, that's sort of a fictitious force because you're not actually going right. It just sort of seems that way relative to the car because you're sort of in that frame of reference. So there is definitely a difference between straight line path and curvilinear path, okay? Curvilinear path has built into it, because of inertia, what's called centrifugal force or centrifugal force, right? It's a centrifuge. And basically what that is it's sort of a fictitious force where objects tend to maintain their velocity, right, until enacted upon by some other force. It's one of Newton's laws of motion. So like if you're standing still, it takes energy to get you to accelerate. If you're traveling down a straight line path, it takes energy to cause you to turn. And the body that is turning sort of wants to maintain that straight line path for whatever reason. That's how inertia works. But when you're dealing with orbiting around the 4,000 mile radius curve of the Earth at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, certainly faster than the speed of sound in, say, New York or wherever you are in the United States, that's a curvilinear path. And so you should necessarily have measurable acceleration, and that's in the form of angular acceleration, right? So that's what they call that. It's not like you're going from 0 to 60, it's like you're going along a curve constantly, and that's angular acceleration is built into that, okay? But it actually goes further because, the globetards don't claim that the Earth's just spinning in space and is stationary, right? No, they claim that while it's spinning in space, it's also orbiting the sun at 18.5 miles a second along yet another curvilinear path. That 18.5 miles per second totals out to 66,600 miles an hour, 66600, right? 18.5 times 60 times 60. And so the rate of the Earth's orbit around the sun, according to the globetards, is 66600 miles an hour. And that is compounded with this alleged spin that's going on faster than the speed of sound. And so what that means is you have not only the added angular acceleration of going along that much larger arc of the alleged orbital trajectory. But you also have a never ceasing to vary acceleration of these two systems. You got the Earth spinning, and sometimes it's traveling this way as it spins counterclockwise, and sometimes it's traveling this way while it spins counterclockwise, according to them. And so as a little, observer somehow attached to the side of this spinning object, which, that's a whole nother thing, but they claim we're standing on the sides of this spinning ball and don't notice the spinning. We don't notice the spinning. We don't notice the orbit. But you have to compound these things, right? So, like, according to their very model, in the morning, when the sun's rising, the Earth is supposedly racing up towards your feet at 66,600 miles an hour. And then 12 hours later, as the sun is setting, the Earth will have accelerated to 180 degrees opposite of that. So now, instead of the Earth racing up towards your feet at nearly 70,000 miles an hour, it is now racing down away from your feet in the opposite direction at 600 miles an hour, right? And by the way, every gradient of velocity in between those two extremes, from traveling at 66,000 miles an hour basically that way to, according to you, 66,000 miles an hour going that way. A total reversal, 180 degree reversal in your trajectory relative to the frame of reference that you're allegedly attached to. And so basically what that means is at like noon, when the sun's right overhead, the Earth would be traveling from left to right under your feet if you're facing north. And at midnight, the opposite of that, from right to left under your feet if you're facing north. So basically what this means is, depending on the time of day, you would have a completely different combination of spin on top of orbital motion. And on top of that, not only is this alleged orbital path very fast, but it's also not a perfect circle either. They claim that it's an ellipse where it's got perihelion and aphelion, which means it's so nonsensical, but it's basically an ellipse, kind of like a running track around a high school football stadium, right? Like an oblong oval. And so what that means is, depending on the time of year, the Earth's orbital trajectory is going to be a sharper curve, traveling at a much faster speed, or a much longer, less pronounced arc, traveling necessarily at, it depends. Like, there's so many variables because, they claim that the Earth travels at a consistent speed relative to the sun. And the sun is also in motion too, by the way. According to them, it's like going at 500,000 miles an hour, and the Earth's tagging along with the sun as well. It gets so nonsensical. And by the way, these speeds, these velocities that they claim for spinning ball Earth are so absurd. You really can't even compare it to anything that would make sense in human terms. Like, it is beyond the pale of absurd. It is ridiculous, these velocities that they claim. But not only do they claim it, if you're a globetard, you must believe that this is what's happening, because it comes part and parcel with their entire model of all things. If the Earth's a spinning ball, as you believe, then you have to subscribe to these velocities. There's no way around it. But the spin of the Earth, the smallest of these alleged velocities, the 1,037.5 mile an hour one, that is comparable. We can kind of understand what that is, because it is faster than the speed of sound. And, regular jetliners are comparable. They travel at cruising speeds comparable to that. So that's not that far into the realm of absurd. I mean, it is absurd for them to claim that. But we can sort of relate to it in human terms, kinda. I mean, not really. You're never going to run that fast or drive in a car that fast, but, planes fly that fast, so it's comparable. But then when you move into the orbital velocities that they claim, 66,600 miles an hour is so fast. 18.5 miles per second is so fast. There's just no way you're ever going to really wrap your brain around how fast that is. It is ridiculously fast. And again, you also must add in the sun's orbital trajectory around the center of the galaxy, allegedly, which, by the way, the sun's trajectory is supposedly at about a 60-degree angle to the Earth's trajectory, or the ecliptic plane. So you have this sort of off-kilter, wobbly, spinning ball that's traveling along this curved linear path and that curved linear path at the same time. And by the way, they also claim that the galaxy is flying through space at some untold millions of miles an hour. Stinky Cash, yeah, I am in South Carolina, and I'm in Greenville, brother. Sorry, I just noticed that when I get carried away, right? And so the speeds, they're able to get around it because they've convinced themselves as globetards that none of those speeds, none of these ridiculous trajectories are noticeable or measurable or demonstrable in any sense, because they claim that it is a consistent speed and only acceleration is measurable, okay? But, strictly in the act of rotating and orbiting, you've got built-in angular acceleration that should be absolutely measurable, detectable. Depending on the time of day, depending on the time of year, you should have all these different wild combinations of accelerations, angular accelerations, as well as accelerations in terms of speed. Because again, you've got these elliptical orbital paths, and it takes the Earth, the same amount of time to go through this 3 months as it does that 3 months, and they're completely different. So if you animate these orbital trajectories out and just study them, it becomes obvious that the orbiting body could not be traveling at any sort of consistent speed. It must be accelerating in all sorts of wild directions in terms of the actual speed, not just forget about angular acceleration altogether. There should be mad acceleration, part and parcel, built right into the heliocentric model. And how they've gotten physicists and people calling themselves scientists to actually believe that such a spinning ball would not exhibit, signs of acceleration or signs of centrifugal force or signs of inertia is crazy to me. And again, the only reason that they've been able to get away with this is because they convince us all, when we are basically toddlers, that the Earth is this spinning ball in space. And really, they've constructed our entire modern paradigm around this godless universe that exists within infinite space. But, the lights in the sky are definitely a mystery. The lights in the sky, the celestial lights, are definitely the signature of the Creator, but they're local. And there's all kinds of evidence to demonstrate that, the celestial sphere is a local phenomenon. Eclipses are a perfect example. And I won't get into all that because it's sort of straying off the topic here. But, in terms of the centrifugal force, the only way that you generate centrifugal force is if you have an axis and you have something attaching this body to prevent it from traveling in a straight line. And that, say you've got a weight tied to a string, and you start spinning that weight around on your, in your fingers, you spin the weight around on the string. It is the centripetal force of that string that allows for this rotation to happen. If you cut that string, the rotation stops. It's not like the weight's going to continue spinning around your fingers when you cut the string. The string is necessary for the rotation. So you can't have centrifugal force or centrifugal force without centripetal force. And just keep that in mind when we get into one of these articles that I wanted to share with you guys today, because basically they just want you to completely forget about everything that we know about physical reality, to go with the notion. We'll get into the article. I don't even know how to describe the stupidity of the globetards sometimes, but just keep these things in mind: centrifugal force and inertia. Robert MB Realist, I keep seeing that advertised on Netflix, but I have not seen it yet. 3-body problem. Is it good? Guns of Navarone, yeah, your comments are visible. It's kind of hard for me to respond to comments if I happen to notice it pop up while I'm looking, but sorry. It's I don't have exactly the best setup, and it is super hot in here. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Let me see who that was. Okay, Dale Fuller says, what do you think, or how do they predict solar eclipses, and what do I believe they are? 1 second, and let me turn my air on real quick. So I know full well how they predict solar eclipses. There's a pattern. So all eclipses, solar and lunar eclipses, happen in a repeating pattern. So once you know what that pattern is, and basically what that takes is you have to study astronomy for a long time. You have to document and study astronomical occurrences for a long time, which the ancients definitely did. And once you know the pattern of eclipses, you can predict them right down to the minute, where they're going to be. And in fact, I think, interestingly, if I'm not mistaken, the Antikythera device, which was this really interesting metallic ancient machine that was found in the waters off of Greece somewhere, like in the Mediterranean Ocean, I want to say. And basically they couldn't figure out what this Antikythera device was for the longest time, but when they finally studied it and put everything back together, it appears that not only could it predict eclipses, but a whole lot of other sort of almanac relevant celestial happenings, right? But so that's definitely how they predict eclipses. Is it's not like they're using any sort of model to sort of discern when an eclipse is going to happen and where. It has nothing to do with a model that you use. It is simply diligent watching of the skies, documenting of past eclipses, and then applying that. I think it's on an 18-year cycle. When I started re-looking into eclipses as a flurfer a number of years ago, what I found to be very interesting was, for all of my life, I had just sort of assumed that lunar eclipses would be more common than solar eclipses. I had just assumed that based on the heliocentric model. Basically, my reasoning, my logic was that, in order for a solar eclipse, the moon has to transit the sun, which is kind of like threading a needle in space, right? It should be very rare. However, on the other hand, according to the heliocentric model, a lunar eclipse, I kind of assumed would be way more common, because all the moon has to do is travel through the shadow of the Earth during a full moon phase, which you would think that would be very common because of sort of how light and shadows work. But no, if you actually study the fact, total solar eclipses and total lunar eclipses over the course of like 100 years happen about the same number of times, which to me I thought was very interesting when I was sort of just new to looking into flat Earth. But so for the second part of your question, what do I think they are? I'm personally still of the belief that solar eclipses are almost certainly the moon transiting the sun. Now, I know there is another school of thought with flurfers. I want to say Crow 777 had mentioned he didn't think it was the moon because we know where the moon should be during the no moon phase. Because again, it is prerequisite for a solar eclipse has to be and always will only ever be on the no moon phase, which actually does lend itself nicely to the concept that we're dealing with an alignment of the two. But I don't want to misquote him, but his logic was that the moon, we know where the moon should be on the no moon phase, and that's not where the moon is during the eclipse. So it couldn't be the moon, it must be another body, which maybe he's right. But what my understanding is that where we visually see the moon to be and expect that the moon is merely an apparent position. And if you're looking at the moon and point at the moon, you're not actually pointing where the moon physically is. You're pointing at an apparent position of the moon, which is affected by all sorts of things, refraction, refringence. There's a number of things. So it isn't a deal breaker, in my opinion, for solar eclipses to be the moon transiting the sun, even in light of that information, because of the fact that we just don't really know exactly where this, assuming that the moon is a physical object at all, we don't necessarily know exactly where it is or where the sun is. Based on its visual apparent position in the sky. It's just not a good indicator. Perhaps when the celestial lights are directly overhead, there's going to be way less refraction due to the atmosphere. So that may be an accurate position when it's 90 degrees overhead. However, we do have other things that perturb inbound light, other than just atmospheric refraction. So you've got things like magnetic refringence, which magnetic fields alter the path of light waves. And so we just don't know exactly where the moon is. So to answer your question, I believe that the solar eclipses are the moon transiting the sun. And what we're dealing with, in my opinion, is sometimes on the flat earth, not on ball earth, but in reality on the flat earth, sometimes the moon is lower in altitude than the sun. And that would be your no moon phase when it is at its lowest relative to the sun. And the moon is higher in altitude than the sun when it is at its full moon phase. And full moon would be when it's at its peak, right? So relatively speaking, the sun and the moon are on approximately the same level of the heavens, but there is a variable between the two. So sometimes the moon is higher than the sun, full moon. Sometimes the moon is much lower than the sun, no moon. And this would also mean that the phases of the moon are, so it's not like self-luminous, it is still reflected sunlight somehow. And, to me, that makes good enough sense. Now, we could be getting into even funkier territories where part of me wants to suggest that perhaps the sun and the moon and the celestial objects are of higher physical dimensional objects, right? So maybe they are beyond the third dimension, and we are bound to the third dimension. And so any higher dimensional object that we bear witness to sort of has to present itself in 3 dimensions. Really, we only get 2 dimensions when it comes to the heavens. We don't have 3D capability to observe the heavens, right? So, that is speculation there, that perhaps the sun and the moon are higher dimensional objects, and so they are not necessarily bound to the same physical laws that we know and understand here on the physical plane, right? It is, so in this sort of hypothesis, it is beyond our capacity as third dimensional creatures to fully grasp and understand what's actually going on with the sun and the moon. But with that being said, I think that the solar eclipses are the moon transiting the sun, and perhaps you do have some other objects up there, like the Vedic tradition of Rahu and Ketu, which are these sort of dark star objects in the heavens that we can get glimpses of sometimes. Maybe that's the case. Now, in terms of lunar eclipses, I think that it is very likely that we are dealing with something like that. And if you look back a few years on my channel, I did observe it was like the blood wolf moon eclipse a few years back. It was a lunar eclipse. And there were so many things wrong with it in terms of, not matching up to the heliocentric model. The heliocentric model is a pretty simplistic geometric system, right? You have alignments, you have orbits, but you can sort of understand it, right? And the way that lunar eclipse behaved, there was all kinds of problems with it, aligning to the heliocentric model. Now, in terms of what's actually going on with the lunar eclipse, we definitely have some sort of alignment that is, in some respects, connected to the sun and the moon and the earth. But certainly we don't have certainly we don't have the earth getting in between the earth and the moon, right? I mean, getting between the sun and the moon, sorry. And I think, the best piece of evidence against that is the Shenanigans, where total lunar eclipses were observed in their totality while the sun was in the sky and the moon was in the sky at the same time. So you can't have an alignment between the sun, earth, and moon during the full moon phase, no less, and see both the sun and the moon in the same sky. There's just no geometric way for that to happen. And so they explain that away in the Shenanigans with refraction, but just absolutely absurd. So hopefully that answers your question, man. I think I covered what do I think and how do they predict the eclipses and what do I believe they are. Yeah, so I think that answers it. Hopefully I didn't get too off the track, but okay. And I appreciate the super chat, man. God bless you. Okay, so let's get into a couple of these articles, man. I found these very interesting to share with y'all. So the first one is going to be from Popular Science. And the headline reads, NASA needs your smartphone during April's solar eclipse. Okay. And the image, there's a blurb here about the image was on the thumbnail of this video. So if you look at the thumbnail, the image that they're referring to highlights the Bailey's Deads, a feature of solar eclipses that are visible at the very beginning and at the very end of totality. It's composed of a series of images taken during a total solar eclipse, visible from ESO's La Silla Observatory on 2 July 2019. Bailey's Beads, not Bailey's Deads. Wow, PopSci needs a copy editor too. Literally on this on this article I'm reading, this professional article from Popular Science, in the caption under the image, in the first few words is, the image highlights Bailey's Deads, D-E-A-D-S, Bailey's Deads. But it is not that, it is Bailey's Beads, okay? Bailey's Beads are caused by the moon's mountains, valleys, and craters. These surface features can create an uneven edge of the moon where small beads of sunlight still shine through to the lowest parts for a few moments after the rest of the sun is covered. Right. Okay, so enough of that caption. Listening for crickets isn't the only way you can help NASA conduct research during the total solar eclipse passing across much of North America this coming April 8th. And by the way, just pausing that for a second to really answer dude's question about eclipses, again, the way that they're predicted is through studying of past eclipses. That's it. Doesn't matter if you use a geocentric model or a heliocentric model. None of that comes into play at all. It's just knowing the pattern of eclipses. So anyway, you can also lend your smartphone camera to this cause of the eclipse, helping out NASA. NASA, never a straight answer, is calling on anyone within the upcoming eclipse's path to totality to participate in its Sun Sketcher program. The program will amass volunteer researcher data to better understand the star's shape. To participate, all you need is NASA's free app, which uses a smartphone's camera coupled with its GPS coordinates to record the eclipse. But why? Grrr, drum roll. So the sun looks simply spherical in many photographs and renderings, and in the sun, if you happen to briefly glance at it during the day, an emphasis on briefly, of course, but thanks to what's known as oblateness, this isn't ever really the case. A rotating spheroid will oblate when its centrifugal force generates enough inertia to slightly flatten it out into a more irregular elliptical shape. Within the solar system, Earth, Jupiter, and Saturn all also display oblateness, but the sun has some unique characteristics affecting how it oblates in particular. So, yeah, we'll continue with the article, but just to comment on that, so they're saying that because of centrifugal force, the Earth and the Sun and these other so-called planets oblate. They get a little chubbier at the center because of rotational centrifugal force, right? According to NASA. Okay. According to NASA, the sun's oblateness depends upon the interior structure of the rotation, which we know from sunspot motions to be latitude dependent at least. Astronomers also think gas flows accompanying the sun's magnetic activity and convection can create transient distortions of a smaller level. The upcoming total solar eclipse will provide astronomers an opportunity to better understand all of this in the sun. But to make that happen, NASA wants you to harness the moon. This is written so weirdly. Okay, Earth's natural satellite, the moon, can serve as a valuable research partner in measuring the sun's oblateness. This is due to a phenomenon known as Bailey's beads, not Bailey's deads. That's so funny. Which are the tiny flashes of light during an eclipse that occur as solar light passes over the moon's rugged terrain of craters, hills, and valleys. Since satellite imagery has helped produce extremely detailed mappings of lunar topography, experts can match Bailey's beads to the moon's features as it passes in front of the sun. So why do they need all of these inputs? I don't understand, or all of these cameras. Let's keep reading, because there's a couple things I want to say, but I am curious to know what they're expecting to do with all these vantage points. So let me just write these things down, because I will totally forget. Okay. So this is it. Yeah, that's exactly, this is good. Hold on. Okay. These flashes will vary depending on where an observer is located within the path of the totality. If you could amass data from a vast number of observer locales, however, you could better understand the sun's surface variations due to its oblateness. And there are potentially millions of individual locales directly underneath the April 8th eclipse. Okay, so let's just stop this right here, because my point is, if a solar eclipse was occurring in the heliocentric model, that would place the sun, the light source, over 90 million miles away. And it would place the moon, the obstruction of that light source, at about 250,000 miles away, right? So the idea that that sort of a layout would vary for little observers on Earth 250,000 miles away from the obstruction, depending on where you are in the path of the totality, I would argue that that is really great evidence of the sun and the moon, or definitely at least the moon, being local, right? Because, if the sun is if the moon is relatively close, yeah, I could see why, if you're standing in, the north part of Texas or the north part of Oklahoma or whatever the case is, how you'd have a different vantage point on this eclipse. That's because we're dealing with a local phenomenon here. Obviously, if the sun and the moon were as far as they say, it wouldn't matter if you're standing in China or in Florida. You'd get basically the same, assuming that it's maybe China and Florida is not a good example, but we'll say Florida and Texas, right? Or Florida and California, even if it was going across both states. There shouldn't be a big difference in those two vantage points if you're dealing with a very distant phenomenon. But, again, and maybe I'm not articulating the best way, and it would be better if I had some diagrams to show you, but I think y'all are smart enough to understand what I'm saying. The fact that you've got allegedly this big variance in the way the eclipse is observed, depending on where you're standing, I think, to me, that's very good evidence that we're dealing with local objects and not some million-mile distant sun and hundreds of thousands of mile distant moon. That's frankly quite ridiculous. But anyway, so we'll continue with the article here. So they're saying all volunteers need to do is angle their phones up to capture the big event and let SunSketcher record the rest. All those videos are collected, NASA says. The solar disk size and shape can be calculated to within a few kilometers, an accuracy that is far better than any currently known. Wow. End quote. The reliable, detailed information on solar oblateness captured during SunSketcher can also be used to study how solar gravity affects the motions of inner planets, as well as help test various gravitational theories. It's worth noting that serving as an official SunSketcher volunteer will sacrifice the ability to use your smartphone to snap videos or pictures for yourself, but that's arguably a small price to pay for helping conduct valuable scientific research. Wow. So my 2 cents on this is either this is just a huge data mining potential security breach that I wouldn't give NASA access to my smartphone unless they paid me a bunch of money, then they can have the damn thing. Other than that, no, I wouldn't do that. I don't trust them, and I'll give my information to the DMV or the DSS or whoever, but not NASA. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. And again, for all the billions of dollars that we give these boneheads to study the sun currently, they really need this. Like, I don't buy it, not for a minute. Yeah, I think they are perfectly capable and have it within their budget to study the sun's oblateness without everyone's help, without everyone giving access to the smartphone. And, if it isn't a big data mining potential security breach, if that's not the case, then they're just doing this because they don't want people to have footage of the eclipse. Because why? Because when I saw that lunar eclipse and watched the whole thing and did it as a live stream, one of the major problems with the lunar eclipse was so the moon, the shadow came up this way and then covered the whole moon, and you're expecting it to keep going and go that way, but no, the shadow went up this way and covered the moon and then went back down this way. So weird. And of course, if you study the moon and watch the moon throughout the night as it traverses the sky, it also spins like a wheel through the sky. You can see time lapses of it, which is really interesting and very bizarre. But in terms of the ball Earth theory, it makes no sense at all. The moon should not be doing that according to the heliocentric model, right? The moon allegedly orbits the Earth, obviously, once every month. And it spins on an axis, right? Once every month. It's supposedly, they claim that the moon spins synchronized to its orbit through this magical, whimsical thing called tidal locking, right? But so that's their claim about the moon's rotation. And the fact that the moon, if you follow it through the sky any night, spins like a wheel through the sky. And not only does the moon, like, so the rabbit on the moon will start the evening or the day right side up. And then as it traverses through the sky, it'll wind up upside down. Not only does the surface features of the moon rotate, but also where the light is rotates with that. So, you know, how that is finagled into the heliocentric model, I'm not really sure. But again, it doesn't work. The heliocentric model does not work to explain observable reality. And as soon as we start really skeptically analyzing the heliocentric model and comparing that with observable reality, it falls apart. But again, the way that they got away with this is they forced us into this belief system of infinite space, this godless universe with spinning ball Earth, when we were little kids, incapable of really a logical conversation, certainly incapable of debate or defending ourselves against the entire educational system, our parents who were also raised to believe in spinning ball Earth just like us. That's why they do it. And so the reason that they're able to get away with a model that really does not work, but everybody believes in, including all of the brightest minds of science, is because they tricked us when we were little kids. So, you know, it's better for them to tie a millstone around their neck and cast themselves into the sea than to do that. So I pity the po fool, as Mr. T says, right? Okay, so that's that first article. And, you know, the Sun Sketcher, if y'all want to do it, be my guest. I'm not. I wouldn't trust NASA as far as I could throw them, honestly. And, you know, I wouldn't trust PopSci either. I mean, can you believe that in the caption of this picture, there's this really blatant typo? And this is coming from a guy who misspelled the word calendar on a calendar right on the cover in like 500-point font for a golf course, right? So I really don't have room to talk, but this is not some little print shop. This is popsci.com. You would think that they could run a spell check on their articles. And that's, I guess, why they didn't catch it, because dead is spelled right. But I guess they didn't proofread it is what the thing is. Anyways, it seems like I find a major, and I hate to be nitpicky about misspellings and grammar, but come on, these people are getting paid to do this, and I just can't imagine. Okay, so on to the next one. Sorry, I'm like sitting here sweating my ass off. Let me turn the air back on. Somebody turned it off. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Okay, so there's 70 of y'all in the live stream. Welcome, welcome, and only 33 thumbs up. So definitely need to get at least one more thumbs up because Russian vids might snipe the stream. There we go. Thank you, appreciate it. I love Russian vids, although, my God, man, enough of the 33s. Okay. So this is going to be from spacenews.com. Washington. NASA and Boeing say, let me give you the article's headline. There is no headline. Okay, well, whatever. I'm not going to give you the headline. NASA and Boeing say they are working towards the first crewed flight of the CST-100 Starliner spacecraft in early May. A final milestone before the vehicle is cleared for regular flights to the International Space Station. Okay.
You said Boeing?
Yeah.
You know, Boeing's that plane, that door blew off, and they're being fined a lot of money.
Yeah, I'm hearing that Boeing is being fined a lot of money because their planes are falling apart in the sky, but now they're going to be...
Their wheel fell off and their door blew off.
They're going to be sending liars to space now. But I do think it's interesting, if this is the same contract that we discussed on the last stream, they've already been paid like hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to deliver this milestone that's like 2 years late, I think. I don't want to quote wrong, but I believe that this is related to that same no-bid contract where they've already been paid a couple of years for something that they should have had done already. But they're saying now May. So at a series of briefings, March 22nd, so this is just from yesterday, NASA and Boeing officials said preparations for the crew flight test, or CFT mission, are proceeding well, with a launch schedule for no earlier than May 1st. So they're not going to do it any earlier, even if they could, because why would you? Man, it's hard to be NASA, boy, I'll tell you. That schedule is driven by the ISS, or colloquially known as the LISS, Manifest of Visiting Vehicles, which earlier this month delayed the mission from late April. That mission will send NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams to the station, where they will spend about 8 days before returning to land in the Southwest United States. And you know, I will say, certainly they're gonna spend all this money to send these two boneheads, which I don't know, I've never seen them, I don't even know who they are. They're gonna spend billions of dollars to send these boneheads to the LISS for 8 days for some very important things, I am 100% sure. So important, like the fate of humanity we probably won't make it if they don't send these boneheads into space for 8 days by no earlier than May 1st, right? They wouldn't do it earlier if they could, like I said, because they're NASA, and it's hard to be NASA. So they're going to send Butch and Suni to the station. The flight will take place nearly 2 years after a second uncrewed flight test, OFT-2, that also docked with the station, allegedly. So they say. I don't believe them. The CFT flight is really the introduction of crew into our vehicle systems. So a lot of our flight test objectives are about how that interface will work, said Mark Nappy, Vice President and Starliner Program Manager at Boeing. Quote, it's all about, does the vehicle perform with the human in the loop as expected, huh? Question mark, end quote. Wow. So they're going to send these Butch and Suni into space, allegedly, just to see if it performs? Shouldn't they be sure about that before they do that kind of test? I don't know, man. Either it's going to go off without a hitch, or Butch and Suni are screwed. One or the other, and nothing in between. It's either going to be perfectly nominal or absolute catastrophe, one or the other. My money on this one, honestly, my money, it's actually no, because this is Boeing, right? This one will be absolutely nominal. I've got a feeling they're going to try and throw monkey wrenches into anything that Elon Musk touches at this point. But Boeing, they're going to come out smelling like a rose on their space stuff, I believe. And again, this stuff's all preordained, pre-written. There is nothing random, or there's no chance about it. Like, it's clearly a script. We know they're not sending people into space, obviously. So yeah, they're going to see it. They're going to just see if the vehicle performs with humans inside. That's so funny. And it's funny that he asked it as a question. It's all about, does the vehicle perform with the human in the loop as expected? Huh? So stupid. Okay, those test objectives range from the performance of the spacecraft's light support systems to the use of manual controls to operate the spacecraft should any automated systems fail. Wilmore and Williams will test the ability to manually control and orient the spacecraft during a day-long flight to the ISS and test maneuvering during a 6.5-hour trip from the station back to the ground. Yeah, sure they are. It's a test pilot's dream, if you will. Everything that we're doing from start to finish, said Wilmore at another briefing. CFT will be the final major milestone before NASA formally certifies the spacecraft for crew rotation flights, starting with the Starliner 1 mission in early 2025. So, like, I'm sorry, but isn't SpaceX supposed to be the one doing this? Like, that's what we've been shelling like billions and billions and billions of dollars to Elon Musk and his freaking goat rope so that his company could be sending these. Now we're going to have Boeing do it. Like, when was this decided? And it's like, what happens if Boeing fails? Are we going to go like revolving door to the next space hustle contractor? Hey, maybe we'll get a shot at it, Flurfers. Let's start a space hustle company, you guys. Maybe we can get some billions. For real. You don't have to do much. And we'll have like years to deliver anything. Wow. The certification is expected to be complete in November or December, unless any issues come up during CFT. Quote, it kind of needs to happen in that time frame to hit the spring slot. For Starliner 1, he says, quote, I think we have a good shot. We just need to stay on track. Wow. What a pep talk, coach. That's definitely worth some billions of dollars. Stitch said NASA was still wrapping up a few certification items for CFT, including completing the review of data from a parachute test earlier this year that validated a redesigned soft link that was a factor in delaying the mission from last year, as well as completing analysis of abort modes. Neither appeared to pose a risk of further delays. We're in really good shape. You know, isn't it funny though? Like, as much time and as much money as we've spent developing space technologies, and we're talking since the like 50s and the 60s, we've been dumping like just untold trillions of dollars into space technologies. And here we are today. Not only are we no better at space than we were 50 years ago, we're actually way worse at space than we were over 50 years ago. Like, way worse, hands down, right? Obviously, these motherfuckers could send flying Freemasons to the moon, no problemo, willy-nilly, like it wasn't nothing, like it was a layup, right? They could do that in the late 60s. They didn't have to test shit. They just did it right on the first time, didn't they? Of course they did. Of course they did. It's so hard to be NASA. But now that we've got all the better technology and now that we've spent just untold trillions of dollars into space, we're still testing shit and it's failing. And excuse my language, my blood is just starting to boil at this. But he says we're in good shape. This guy from Boeing says we're in good shape. Or no, the guy from NASA, Stitch. His name is Stitch, if you can believe that. Okay. Getting Starliner into operational missions, albeit years behind schedule, and this is coming from the article from spacenews.com, years behind schedule, is still desired by NASA to ensure redundancy and access to the ISS, backstopping SpaceX's Crew Dragon. Yeah, see, it is. That's what I thought. Like, what are we even doing here? And these guys are years behind schedule, spent hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars doing absolutely nothing. absolutely nothing to show for it. Quote, "We're really excited on the station side to get this first crewed Boeing Starliner mission up to the space station," said Dana Weigel, NASA's LISS Deputy Program Manager. Quote, "It's always been our goal to have a handful of different vehicles that we can fly to get crew up there," they said. Dana Weigel. So what about all the stuff that y'all were sending lying Freemasons to the ISS with, for the last 20 years? How long has that thing even been up there? Was it been since like the late 90s or something? I forget. It's been up there a long time, way longer than it was designed to, but by some miraculous hand of God interface, it's just up there, no problemo for decades, man. Sure. Because that's how space technology works. It just functions way better than anything, and we all know why. It's called real good engineering, isn't it? Okay, Nappy said that Nappy and Stitch, wow, that should be a cartoon like Beavis and Butthead, only gayer. Nappy said that Boeing's focus is getting Starliner into operation for NASA, fulfilling a contract awarded nearly a decade ago for 6 ISS flights, and is not actively considering other private missions for the space crew now. I'm sorry. See, this is another typo. I'm sorry. I'm going to call him out, Space News, and is not actively considering other private mission, singular, for the spacecraft for now. Missing a comma. No, I'm kidding. They were missing a comma too. Dude, I give them an F. Okay, anyway, quote, "The private astronaut missions are of interest later in the decade," he said, "but only after operational missions begin." So years behind schedule, still got paid, and NASA just sweating their nuts hard, dude. It is so hard to be NASA. They've probably got like, what is it? Postpartum depression? No, what do they got? Munchausen syndrome? I don't even know. It doesn't matter. But it's hard to be NASA. We know that. One of the people who has waited the longest for CFT is Williams, who was named by NASA in 2015 to a quote-unquote cadre of astronauts who would train for the first commercial crew missions. It's been a little bit of a timeline to get to this point just before launch, she said at the briefing, but agreed with Wilmore that flying this mission is a test pilot's dream for her. "I don't think I would really want to be in any other place right now." Oh, no shit. Getting paid billions of dollars for absolutely nothing must be nice. Okay, so there was the headline. It just now populated on my screen. So the headline for that was NASA and Boeing prepare for Starliner crewed test flight. Wow. Seriously, flirpers, anybody good at drawing up business plans? Let's put in some proposals for NASA and see if we can't get that space hustle going, man. Fiscal year 2025 is going to be big. I'm sure of it, after the dollar crashes and everything. Okay. So this next one here from New York Times, I thought this was interesting. NewYorkTimes.com. NASA is recruiting a new class of astronauts. Yeah. They're going to be the ones with their anuses directly on the front of their heads. No, I'm kidding. That's not what it says. That was a joke. NASA is recruiting. Oh, no, the new kind of astronauts are going to be the ones with their anuses right where they're supposed to be, unlike the other astronauts who have their anuses directly on the front of their heads. It's like their third eye, only browner. Okay. NASA's recruiting a new class of astronauts. Victor Glover, a 9-year veteran of the astronaut corps, who will fly around the moon in 2025, said the search for excellence and diversity were not mutually exclusive. And okay, so the guy that this article is about, and I don't even know if I'm going to read through the whole thing, but the headline I thought was kind of not funny, but such a sign of the times. So the dude, he's a light-skinned, bald-headed black dude who's maybe in his late 30s. Okay, that's who they're talking about, Victor Glover. And I just thought it was funny because this, the subtext under the headline, again, he said the search for excellence and diversity were not mutually exclusive. Like, as if it's almost like, what is he defending himself, like saying that it wasn't some sort of affirmative action? And again, like, I'm not racist, but what I'm saying is the way this article is phrased is like the whole race baiting that we're so familiar with, right? So he's saying that diversity and excellence are not mutually exclusive. As if anybody ever thought that anyway, right? I don't know. It just jumped out at me because why do we have to bring race into this conversation at all? I don't care if the lying Freemasons are pink unicorns with purple hooves. I don't care. He's still a lying Freemason, and I judge people, and I don't really judge people, but I pick my friends based on the contents of their character and not the color of their skin. I pick my lying Freemasonic astronauts, which I'm not 100% sure if this guy is a Freemason, but I would be very surprised to learn that Victor Glover, astronaut, is not a Freemason. That would surprise me immensely, right? And by the way, it wasn't that long ago that Freemasons weren't really into diversity at all, if you know what I mean. That's a relatively new thing, just saying. Okay, so from NewYorkTimes.com, do you dream of leaving the planet? NASA is looking for its next group of astronauts, and you have until April the 2nd to make a pitch for yourself. Damn, I'm running out of time, guys. Typically, it's a very popular application, April Jordan, NASA's astronaut selection manager, said. The odds that you will be chosen are slim. The last time NASA put out a call for applications in 2020, more than 12,000 people applied. It took the agency a year and a half to go through the applications. That's so funny to me. Of course it did. Like, how could it not? Like, if you're going to apply for a job at NASA, you're going to be waiting a year and a half just to hear if they reviewed your application or not. That is so funny. Like, I don't know why that's so funny to me. And it turns out they went and picked their lying Freemasons after all. But you gave it a shot, right? That's so funny. It took them a year and a half to just go through the applications. NASA selected just 10 out of that 12,000, or 0.083%. That makes Harvard's 3.5% acceptance rate among high school applicants appear bountiful. Wow. So when I say popular, Mrs. Jordan said, it's probably an understatement. Miss Jordan is on a media tour to spread the word that the right stuff for being an astronaut in 2024 is not the same as it was in the 1960s, when astronauts were all white men, almost all from the military. And what difference does it make, man? Honestly, what difference does that make? Like, yeah, I'm not really into racism, but who gives a shit? They're lying Freemasons. Most of them were white. Of course they were, because they didn't allow diversity in the Freemasons in the 60s. You do realize that the KKK is a bunch of Freemasons, right? Y'all know that, right? Joining her on that tour, which included a stop at the New York Times, was Victor Glover, the 9-year veteran of the astronaut corps, who offered a glimpse into how he made it through the rigorous selection process. To become a NASA astronaut today, you have to be a U.S. citizen, and you must pass the astronaut physical exam. So no vatos in space, I guess, huh? That's crazy. How are they ever going to get anything done up there? NASA does set a fairly high bar for education. A master's degree in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, followed by at least 3 years of related professional experience. Wow. It's hard to be NASA, boy, I'll tell you. And I'm sure they're not going to mention the fact that you really need to be in the Freemasonic Lodge, because if you're not a Freemason, you're not going to space, dude. I'm just saying. Beyond that, the agency tries. Oh, and by the way, I would interject. I also think that NASA screens for psychopathy, and not to, filter out psychopaths, but to make sure they get psychopaths and promote psychopaths through the ranks because, for obvious reasons, right? Beyond that, the agency tries to keep an open mind. Oh, well, isn't that nice of NASA? There is no age limit, for example, or a requirement for 20/20 vision. That's too funny because, yeah.
So don't take anybody as blind, crippled, and crazy.
Yeah. Blind, crippled, and crazy. Damn right. Okay. We want the group of astronaut candidates that we select to be reflective of the nation that they're representing, Miss Jordan said. Take, for example, Mr. Glover. So let's see how they're going to dance around basically screaming that they hired him because he's a black man without saying he's a black man. Let's just see how they do this, because that's what they're doing. I mean, it's clear, it's obviously a race bait article that they've written, but there's a certain format where you have the unspoken that they just dance around like some kind of a jig or whatever. I don't know what kind of dance. Not a waltz, like a really abstract, what's the word I'm looking for? Interpretive dance. In some aspects, Mr. Glover fits the historical archetype. Before NASA, he was a Navy aviator and trained as a test pilot. Well, why would they want their pilot to have any experience as a damn pilot? I think they should have hired the pink-haired gay dude, right? That's who they should have hired. Who cares if he's a pilot? He's got pink hair and he's gay. He clearly should have been the pilot. I'm outraged. He's also breaking historical barriers. Oh, Lord. In 2020, he became the first black astronaut to serve as a crew member on the International Space Station after 20 years of astronauts living there. Well, I'll be damned. You're not supposed to say that out loud in this article, dude. There's rules. In 2025, he will become the first black astronaut to fly around the moon for the Artemis 2 mission. And he will be the first black astronaut to lie about all this shit. To stand out in NASA's competitive application process, Mr. Glover knew he would need more than a strong resume. He was particularly set on landing a good joke. Yeah, because, when you're in an interview for a very prestigious and highly classified mission, you want to be telling jokes in the interview. The night before one of Mr. Glover's interviews at NASA for the 2013 class, he was asked to write an essay. The title, Girls Like Astronauts. Yeah, and this is more along the lines of the type of people I believe they hire for astronaut stuff. It's people with a certain personality, like, I don't know. I'm not going to say it. Quote, they're sitting in this room all day listening to all these dry answers. He recalled thinking, I'm going to try and make them laugh. That's probably not a bad idea, but I don't think I would make a joke out of an essay. That's totally that's way, way uncalled for in that sort of a setting, in my opinion. I don't know. That just seems over the top to me. The essay pivoted from a punchline to poignancy, reflecting on the ways he's tried to inspire his 4 daughters. He also decided to be vulnerable during the interview, sharing a so-called boneheaded moment when he risked nearly hitting the water during an air show demonstration. Quote, you have to be able to share that information with the interview panel when you come in because you're inevitably going to fail at something, Ms. Jordan said. And so there's a humbleness that you have to bring in even if you've achieved great things. Let me turn this air on a second. Hold on. Jesus Christ. As part of the application process, Mr. Glover wrote a limerick that concluded, quote, "This is all dizzying to me because I gave so much blood and pee." Oh, well, yeah, he's definitely astronaut material. He made a dick and fart joke right in his essay. Hire that man, quick, man. Oh, and he's not a white boy? Dude, score, bro. Score. Now I see why they didn't hire the pink-haired gay dude. The guy made a literal dick and fart joke in his essay for a job at NASA as an astronaut. And by the way, that's not funny either. It's all so dizzying to me because I gave so much blood and pee. Mr. Glover set his sights on going to outer space as a child when he saw his classmates moved to tears by the Challenger disaster. So when he saw the Challenger disaster, that's when he decided he wanted to be an astronaut? That is absurd. This dude, that's a lie. He's lying. I'm sorry, like, logically that makes no sense. He's just saying that to get a reaction. Clearly, I think dude's a psychopath. I'm not a professional. That's just my opinion. And what do I know? I'm just some dumb flurfer. But in my opinion, astronauts are screened for psychopathy. And that's a big red flag right there. Dick and fart jokes on his application. Lying that he was inspired to become an astronaut when he saw 8 people supposedly die in a fiery explosion. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Not really. It says, his space ambition deepened years later when he heard a speech from Pam Melroy, a former space shuttle commander. Ms. Melroy, now NASA's deputy administrator, recounted on her crew had scrambled to fix a damaged solar array on the ISS. Quote, "I thought, wow, she just talked about something really technical, really logistically challenging," Mr. Glover said, "but the emotion in it was about the people." Yeah, because when you're dealing with something logistical, technical, and challenging, you want to be gossiping about people. Obviously, like, that makes perfect sense. And I know it seems like the guy can do no right, in my opinion, but basically that's what it is. Okay. Then he realized then that just as astronauts need technical ability, they also need something that is more difficult to teach: social skills. Yeah, astronauts need social skills, and that's why they hired Dawn Pettit. That was the punchline. Okay, quote, "You're gonna live in this tin can with somebody for 6 months," he said of a stay on the space station. "We're almost picking family members." Mr. Glover proudly points to the diversity background among current astronauts. "If you compare our office to the country's demographics, we match the country very well," he said. Yeah, because clearly we don't want to pick the best people, qualified for the job. We want to pick as many different types of people we can, like, to score diversity points, obviously. That's what makes a space mission successful. Everybody knows that. Indeed, the diversity within NASA outpaces that of the private sector in some aspects. The percentage of Black astronauts is higher than the percentage of Black people in the broader science and technology workforce, Mr. Glover said. That is the direct result of NASA's sustained efforts over a couple of decades to recruit astronauts beyond the traditional archetype, he said. Our office looks the way it looks because of this intentionality and thinking about our biases and how it may affect who we hire, he said. I think that is a huge victory. My God. But Mr. Glover acknowledged that diversity as a hiring goal was becoming increasingly fraught. Critics include Elon Musk, the billionaire who runs SpaceX, the rocket company that NASA relies on to transport cargo and astronauts, as if nobody knew who the fuck SpaceX was, like Mr. Glover, to the International Space Station. NASA has also hired SpaceX to land astronauts on the moon. Yeah, sure they will. And monkeys might fly out of my butt. His perspective on some things is a little disturbing, Mr. Glover said of Mr. Musk. SpaceX didn't respond to a request for comment by Mr. Musk. Mr. Musk has repeatedly called for the end of programs that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. DEI is just another word for racism. He posted on January on Social X, the social network that he owns. Yeah, see, they're definitely taking pox shots at Elon Musk. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of Elon by any stretch of the imagination, but see, he doesn't really fit the mold of what they want. And I agree with the notion that this whole affirmative action type thing, this DEI, is racism. It is definitely and unequivocally racism. But they try to couch it as if it is the opposite of that, like, you know, anti-racism. It's like the Drug Enforcement Agency, right? Their job is to bring drugs into the country from overseas, or at least it used to be. I don't think so much anymore. Good luck finding actual cocaine anywhere. No, I'm kidding. Mr. Glover said he had just listened to a contentious interview that Don Lemon, a former CNN anchor, recently conducted with Mr. Musk. My mom sent it to me and she goes, "Does he remember you and rode in his spaceship?" He said, "I'm like Ma, he probably remembers very vividly. He's a great intellect, but he probably just doesn't care." People ask him how he feels about about becoming the first black person to go on a lunar mission next year when Artemis 2 will swing around the moon without landing. What a stupid question to ask somebody. Why don't you just ask them what it feels like to be a black person, period? And I know this is probably going to get my video demonetized or whatever, but what difference does that make? That's absolutely irrelevant to the conversation at all. Would he be less excited if he was a Chinese person? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, what are they even talking about? I get so tired of this political correctness that is just retarded. Mr. Glover said, "Actually, I'm sad. It's 2025 and I'm going to be the first." Come on. Well, yeah, you can't win for losing, right? He recounted the story of Ed Dwight, the only black Air Force pilot in the 1960s who met the restrictive requirements that NASA had for astronauts then. But Mr. Dwight was never selected. Ed Dwight could have done this in the 60s, Mr. Glover said. How much better would our country be if he actually got the chance? Society wasn't ready. It's not him. He was ready. Maybe they didn't select him because the dude had integrity. Maybe they knew that they couldn't get him to lie about going to the moon, and it doesn't matter what color he is. If he had integrity, they're not going to send him on a fake space mission because space is fake. If you actually go through with this mission, the dude talking, then you lack the integrity that Ed clearly had, hypothetically, in this conversation. He recounted the story of Ed Dwight, I read this. He said he could have done it in the 60s. How much better would our country be if Ed Dwight actually got the chance? Society wasn't ready. It's not him. He was ready. While Mr. Glover has heard some of the pushback to this DEI, basically affirmative action initiatives, he feels firmly that seeking diversity is not about lowering standards and accepting less qualified candidates. I think it should just be excellence, he says. As long as you don't equate whiteness or maleness with excellence, then we're good. We're speaking the same language. And, you know, I totally agree with that. And frankly, if somebody asked me the sort of question like, how does it feel to be a white boy that did XYZ? I would tell them that's a stupid question and to rephrase it because it doesn't matter. And I agree that excellence can be, you know, displayed by all races. There's no race of people that has a monopoly on excellence. And I think that, you know, if you're going to hire people for, you know, space missions, you're going to have to hire people that have no integrity. Excellence has nothing to do with it because space doesn't exist, folks. He said many applicants are drawn by the potential glory of being the first astronauts to walk on Mars, and accomplishments that NASA is aiming for in the 2030s. But Mr. Glover said they should also contemplate the sacrifices that they and their families might have to make along the way. Yeah, you'll have to sacrifice your soul. The trip to Mars is 6 to 9 months, he said. You're going to be away from familiar for more than a year. 1 to 3 years. Are you ready for that? So that's the end of that article. And I've actually got one more for you guys, and I'll make this one relatively quick. And before we get done with this, I just wanted to mention, thank you guys so much for joining and hanging out with me today. If y'all want to support the channel here, links are below. We could certainly use your help. We're trying to get through to the end of this month, still at the hotel, and hoping to move into the new home, the trailer, on the 1st when some money comes in. But until then, it's we're still stuck in this hotel and definitely need some help. So links are below. Okay, so this is actually the main article that I wanted to go over with you guys. I meant to do this one first, but hey, save the best for last, because this one is from thebeaconjournal.com. And the headline is "New Star to Join the Night Sky When Nova Appears This Year, NASA Predicts." This article just from yesterday as well, March 22nd, 2024. Not so fast, solar eclipse. You're not the only rare celestial event happening in 2024. A new star is predicted to join the night sky between February and September, according to NASA. The star, T Coronae Borealis, is in a system 3,000 light years away. According to them, really, it's just right there in the firmament with all the other stars, local phenomenon. But according to them, 3,000 light years away. It last exploded in 1946, and astronomers believe it will do so again between February and September 2024, NASA says. And, you know, just pausing this article really quick, what makes NASA so sure that a star 3,000 light years away, which is probably just trillions and trillions of miles, what makes these motherfuckers think it's going to explode? Like, what do they have? Can they predict the future? Do they have a time machine? What is that? Okay, the star system is usually far too dim to see with the unaided eye. However, after the star goes nova, the system will be of similar brightness to the North Star, Polaris. Once this brightness peaks, it should be visible to the unaided eye for several days, just over a week with binoculars, before it dims again, possibly for another 80 years. So, like, again, pausing this, you know, it is kind of interesting to me that we've got this solar eclipse coming. We've got this, the comet coming. What is it? The Devil's Comet or whatever we talked about last week. And now they're talking about this star near the constellation of Hercules that they're predicting is going to explode. And that it does so, like, what, every 80 years? That's really interesting to me because, again, we know that one thing, and it even says this in the Bible, that the heavens are for basically timekeeping, for keeping the seasons and keeping time. It's basically like God's stopwatch or whatever, right? The creator put the heavens there for a reason, and that reason has to do with timekeeping. But so what is this? Are there certain explosions in the heavens that happen periodically as well that we just don't know about? And this is NASA making a prediction that they know good and well is going to happen because it happens on a cyclical, on a cycle or whatever. I don't know. I found this very interesting. And, maybe this thing will explode in the next few months and maybe it won't. But I do find it very interesting that NASA is able to predict explosions of stars from 3,000 light years away. So that means if we do see this thing explode, like say right now, if it explodes right now, that means according to their logic, according to their model of infinite space, that it actually occurred 3,000 years ago because, it took the light 3,000 years to get here from there. So it's baffling to me how they claim that they're able to predict this. Now, if you're talking about flat Earth reality, if you're talking about the heavens and the firmament being local and cyclical, I find it very sensible that you would have certain phenomenon like comets and explosions that are cyclical and predictable, right? Just like eclipses are on a cycle and it's predictable. So I think that's very interesting. Back to the article, the nova will appear as a bright new star near the constellation Corona Borealis, or the Northern Crown, a small semicircular arc near the Bootes and Hercules constellations. This recurring nova is only one of 5 in our galaxy, according to NASA. They say this happens because the star is a binary system with a white dwarf and a red giant. The 2 stars are close enough that as the red giant becomes unstable from its increasing temperature and pressure and begins ejecting its outer layers, the white dwarf collects that matter onto its surface. The shallow, dense atmosphere of the white dwarf eventually heats enough to cause a runaway thermonuclear reaction, which produces the nova that we see from the Earth. Yeah, I mean, I don't buy any of that for a second. I don't believe in thermonuclear reactions. The whole concept of anything nuclear requires, atoms and molecules. And frankly, I think those are made up, imaginary. So like atoms and molecules don't exist, in my opinion. So the concept that we're dealing with a runaway thermonuclear reaction, in my opinion, is absurd. But what do I know, right? Okay. So that's the end of that article. So wow, we rounded that out at an hour and a half, but once again, you guys, I do appreciate you hanging out with me. Definitely leave some comments. Let me know what you think. And listen, y'all, again, links are below if you would like to help out. We're really we're struggling here, you guys. We're staying in a hotel, trying to make it through to the first, but we just don't have it to keep heads above water until we're able to, God willing, move the hell out of this hotel and into our trailer that is finished and done. We just have to pay for the lot rent and pay to have it moved. And it's just very difficult because every penny that we have goes straight to this hotel and it's never enough. Like, we're going to have to sleep in the car if we don't come up with something. So we definitely could use your help. Or your prayers. Just send us some positive vibes and prayers. I would appreciate it. Love y'all very much. I'll keep you posted as to how everything is going. And I'm going to be putting out some video content that y'all know and love soon. I've just got to, I've got to get a part for my computer as well. It needs a memory upgrade. I can't do anything with it until I get a memory upgrade. So there you have it. Okay, we're going to wrap this one up, guys. One love. Keep it flat. And as always, y'all, spread the word, spread the world, and peace out, everybody. Love yous. Bye.